Our story begins in a place where a swarm of monsters lie on the ground, dead because of our powerful MC. He looks up, knowing that all that is left is to defeat her, and that the long war will be over. He angrily looks at the demon floating in the air, knowing that he is the one who plundered the world and the lives of his friends, and the one who reigns supreme over all the monsters, the Queen. The Queen raises her hand, and he tightly holds his sword. Then she flies toward him to attack him while he is hearing someone call his name, Arden, to apologize. They tell him that in a land where he does not exist and ask him if he ever manages to defend that abominable queen. The representative of the Death Spirit's race, Dharma Moore, tells him that it is all up to him now. He tries to block the queen's attack, but it still pierces his chest. Then he remembers the representative of the ancient dragon race, Reuben, telling him that it is the path of a hero to lead the weak. He clenches his teeth and swings his sword to attack back. But the queen avoids his attack and flies toward him while gathering her power to attack him. When she is close to hitting him, he remembers the representative of the beastmen, Taran, telling him that some things in that world can only come to an end after death, and the representative of the dwarves, Redanville, that though his strength is not adequate, he believes that he differs from them. The queen's attack breaks the ground and makes a huge hole in the wall. Then she looks at the place closely, thinking that she has got him, and smiles without realizing that he is behind her. Then he cuts her arm off, making her shout in pain and anger. Then she reaches him and pierces her hand into his chest. But then he remembers the representative of the mythical race, Kruger, telling him that he knows it is hard to believe, but the place the queen was at, and the representative of the long-eared race, Kashushu, told him that the queen should have known her place and live quietly, then asks him if he thinks the same too. He forcefully grabs the queen's neck and swings his sword backward with force to attack her, but the queen notices it and pulls her hand out of his chest, then gathers her power to attack him again. Their attacks meet in the center, which makes a powerful explosion, breaking the things around them in an instant. Then he remembers the representative of the fairies, Alina, telling him that even if he is the only one left, she begs him for something before dying. After the explosion, the only one standing is the queen. She looks up and sees his arm on the ground. She looks closely and smiles, thinking that she has won. But then his sword pierces her chest. Then he, who is still standing and attacking the queen, hears someone telling him that he is reminiscing about his friend right before the end of his life, and if that is the case, he too shall believe that they will once again meet. He is dying slowly while promising that he will always be waiting and even in repentance, facing the consequences brought forth by his selfishness. A moment later, in the city with high buildings, a man calls him Kiritani Shu, worried, and asks what he is doing. He tells him that they are going to gather up. He replies that he is just lost in thought. The man tells him that if he keeps spacing out, he is going to get fired. And since the battle is already over, they should head back, to which he replies yes while being surrounded by monsters and people. One day, monsters appeared in that world, and the hunters who awakened and gained abilities started to hunt them, and it was a really different view compared to his past life. The man tells him that he'll leave that area to him, and they should finish it before they get nagged by the captain, and he replies that he understands. But then a man calls them fools and asks if they are useless. Commandai, the captain of the first assault team in the Brave Guild, tells them to stop wasting his time or he won't give them their pay, to which the hunters apologize and assure him that they will hurry up. Dai calls them scavengers, useless, and Shu knows that in that world, the bottom feeders in the hierarchy of the dungeons are scavengers like him. The sun was about to set, and he was running in the street, hearing the reporter tell the viewers that it was time for the morning hunters. That day they will be giving a refresher course on the hunters' abilities. Abilities are a form of superpowers, and when one is able to tap into their own potential, they are considered to be awakened as a hunter. Though the conditions for awakening have yet to be discovered, the research is still ongoing, and Shu has yet to awaken as a hunter. Even though he has memories from his past life, he cannot use mana. His mind and body clearly remember, but even if he knows how to swim, there isn't any meaning if water doesn't exist. In spite of his situation, the reason why he continued training day after day was that it was the daily ritual of his past life. He grabbed the stick on the ground, knowing that it was time to try it out. He knows that in the world of the hunters, their status determines how strong an individual will be, but even if he continues training like it, it was all for nothing. Yet the life he lived as a knight, and even if he was the only one who remembers, he wishes to not forget. He powerfully hit the stick in the stone and made a little stone thrown away, but then someone called him from behind, and when he looked back, it was the man named Ren looking at him. Ren asked him if he was training again, and he replied yes, but Ren told him that when he watched him do it every day, it kinda feels like him and yet somehow it doesn't. Ren also told him that he always has that philosophical expression on his face, but he told Ren that it was nothing like it. Ren told him that he should really choose another place to do it because he could get exposed on the internet while they were looking at the mother telling her child not to make eye contact with them. Ren asked him if by any chance he was trying to be a hunter, and he replied that it was not something he can be just because he wants to be. Ren told him that he wants to be a hunter, and he replied that he wants to awaken, become a hunter, and earn a lot of money. He knows that everyone dreams of being a hunter because hunters get a yearly income of billions, admiration from the opposite sex, and standing on the very front lines to face the unknowns, making him think that the world is true to the phrase in the era of hunters. Ren patted his head and told him that he guesses he will get it when he grows up a little more, and people who have something to protect always need money, to which he replied that he understands, but thinks about Ren's words. Then they proceeded to walk while Ren tells him that the raid schedule of the next dungeon will be released tomorrow, and he hopes they don't go anywhere too dangerous. He told Ren that he hopes so too, but the next morning their captain told them that the dungeon they will be tackling at that time will be the Labyrinth of Remara, and they will send them the details via mail. But one of them excused himself to Dai and told Dai that they heard it was a very dangerous place even amongst the C ranks. Ren also told Dai that he heard a different guild went and came back very beaten up, and he thinks it was really too much for them because they just reached D rank recently. So Remara is a little too much, but Dai just frustratingly told them to shut up and listen. Then Dai told them not to lump cleaners like them together with the hunters, and if they were being paid, they should stop whining and just listen to the orders and not act as if his opinions matter. Then Dai told Ren that he shouldn't have to put it like that and asked him if it was almost time for his contract renewal. Then Dai told them that anyone who doesn't want to do it can just leave. However, in that industry, trust is the most valued asset, and people who leave before the end of their contract will not be hired anywhere else. Also, Dai told them that even if he kept his mouth shut, rumors spread on their own. He was mad to hear it and sighed, making Dai ask which person was the one that just sighed, and asked Shu if it was him again, but he proudly replied that it was him again. Dai furiously asked him how many times has he told him to mind his manners and not to act up when he was just a loner. But then Ren replied that he'll participate and told Dai to stop if he would want to avoid weird rumors before the raid starts. Dai looked at Ren in anger, but the other scavengers thought if Ren was going, they will go, and nothing will go wrong since the hunters will be there. But Dai smiled while thinking that they were stupid, and if they were going to fold with that little pressure, they should have just shut up and followed orders in the first place. Then Dai walked away while shouting at them to do it right and he'll be waiting. Ren sadly told him that they should go while he was glaring at Dai. The next day, they were in front of the dungeons while Dai told them that they will be doing a rundown before the actual raid. Then he ordered Haida and Kuda to be in front, then ordered Akeshi to give range support and told the magic support group to always be ready and prepared to fire. But he noticed that everyone looked worried, but he knows that it was understandable since the other hunters seemed to be negative about the raid, yet they were forced to comply. Dai shouted to the scavengers that they should stay out of the hunters' way. Ren worriedly told him that they should depart soon, then the scavengers and Ren looked at the portal worriedly, but he was just looking at it calmly. Then he entered the C-rank dungeon, the Labyrinth of Remara, in the name of Brave Guild's first assault team, D rank, while realizing that it wasn't his first step to death. A moment later, they arrived at the entrance of the Labyrinth of Remara. The woman asked Sheeta if she didn't think something was strange, and she replied that it seemed almost completely different from what she had heard. She asked if she should report it to the captain, but the woman replied not to because it was just a mere C-rank dungeon, and she was sure they could handle it. She also told Sheeta that recently, their captain hadn't been in a good mood, so it was best they didn't bother him. Ren told him that the hunters were acting a little strange, and he replied that he was right because he noticed that the hunters seemed like they were worried about something. He looked around while wondering if it was different from what the hunters expected. But then they heard a loud growl making them surprised. But Dai just smiled, and he was just seriously waiting. Dai raised his sword to stop them and looked at the dark cave-in. Then slowly a monster came out of it, but it was a swarm of monsters, not just one. Dai shouted to them that it was coming. He asked Ren if he didn't think it was a little too much from the start, and Ren replied that it was suspicious. But Dai jumped forward to attack while shouting at them not to hesitate and do something if they wanted the money. Dai stabbed the monster in the front and told them that though there were a lot of them, in the end, they were just some bugs. Dai pulled his sword out and cut the monster into 3 while ordering the tanks to charge. The tanks ran toward the monster to defend and attack the monsters in front. Then Ren told the scavengers that they should stand by in formation and stay close. Then the monster jumped into the ceiling and growled at them angrily. Then a lot of monsters crawled in the ceiling toward them, jumped down, and opened their mouths to attack the tanks, making the people behind panicked. But then the lady shouted to everyone to get back while aiming her flaming arrow toward the monster. Then she released it to the monsters, making them burn and exploded into pieces. Ren and Shu moved aside to not get hit by the fire, and one of the men asked if it was over. But Dai told them not to just stand there because the mid-boss was coming. The huge monster's leg walked out, breaking the ground in the process, and the Gala's mid-boss of the Labyrinth of Remara furiously growled at them. Dai and the tanks ran toward it while Dai told them to avoid the tail and aim for the head, and they should protect their own bodies. The Gaulas swung its tail toward them, and the men were hit and thrown away. Then it jumped, making Dai tell them that it was leaping and they should dodge it. So the men avoided it in time, thanks to it, and asked if the magician unit was there. The magician told them that they finished their preparations, so they should stop yelling at them and get out of their way. But Dai told them not to hit the shell because they were going to barrage it. Then they hit its side, making it shout in pain. The fire burned it, and a minute later, the fire slowly extinguished and showed the burned and injured Gaulas. Dai asked if they killed it and ordered the scavengers to collect everything that seemed like it would be worth some money, to which they replied they understand. One man hit its tail using his sword, but he asked why it was so tough, and he was shocked when he saw that it was still alive. Then it released poisonous saliva to burn the man alive. The man slowly dissolved until he disappeared, making the people panic and shouted that they didn't hear it would have poisonous breath. Ren shouted to everyone to go in the rear and run deep in because even the poison from the vapor was dangerous. The others asked what the hunters were doing because they knew that the hunters were supposed to check for stuff like it before they came. But he noticed that something was truly wrong. Dai furiously asked them what they were doing and told them that it was not time to be lazing because something like it could easily be dealt with if they just stopped its breathing. But he noticed that Dai looked shaken up too. The hunters shielded and avoided the poison, making Dai tell them that they were useless. Then Dai ran toward it while telling them to move because he'd take care of it. Then he jumped high, aimed at its head powerfully, and cut its head out of its body. The people happily told Dai that as expected of their captain. He was completely different from C ranks, but Dai just told them to stop being lazy and get moving, to which they agreed and told everyone that they should check on the equipment and get the injured for the time being. But then they saw something fly behind them and saw something with red eyes. Then they heard a loud and creepy angry sound of monsters, making them shocked and stunned. It slowly came out, and one of them said that there was no way because even though they just defeated the mid-boss, he wondered why the dungeon boss was there. It was the Raymara boss of the labyrinth of Raymara. It flies toward them to attack, making one of them ask Dai what they should do. But Dai replied that there is nothing else they can do and orders them to get in formation immediately. The feathers of the boss fall toward them, and Dai injects something into his body while shouting at them to quickly inject the antidote, because if they touch its feathers, they'll be mentally corrupted. But the people were too scared and worried to do it right away, so the feather hit the man's shoulder and the man slowly felt dizzy. When he was about to say something, his eye veins slowly changed to black. The others run away in fear, shouting that there is no way they can defeat something like it, making Dai furiously shout at them that each and every one of them is a coward. But then the feather hit Dai, and he saw his people slowly losing their minds while the boss was looking at them, which made him ask if this isn't a C-rank dungeon. On the other hand, he was covering his head with his bag, thinking that there has to be something else the rear can do. But it was also a matter of time, and they need to escape before the boss gets too wild. Then he told Ren that they should at least take the scavengers with them and quickly escape. But Ren just asked him why, and he replied that they should hurry as much as possible. But Ren told him that, to think at a place like this, they can obtain treasure, so there is no way he can leave. He pointed to the items on the ground, telling him that everything there is worth some money, and even a sword from a hunter who melted from poison is worth 200 million, so there have to be even more expensive ones. He grabs Ren while begging Ren to get a hold of himself, because everything is already melted. But Ren crazily said that it was his money and there is so much money everywhere that even the shield on the ground was at least a couple 100 million. Then Ren pushed him back to get the shield, but he grabbed Ren's arm and told Ren that he can't. But Ren swung the sword he was holding toward him, shouting at him to let go. He got hit and fell to the ground. Then Ren tried to kill him, telling him that if he wants to leave, he should just leave by himself and not get in his way. He shakily tried to stop Ren by holding his sword, but Ren forcefully tried to stab him, shouting that all of it was his money. But he still tried to calm Ren, but Ren shouted that for his little sister's sake. He needs money because his precious little sister is sick, so he needs money to cure his little sister. Ren also shouted, asking why couldn't he be a hunter and why must his little sister suffer like this when all he wants to do is to live happily with his little sister, and he only wishes for her to be happy. He sadly called Ren's name, slowly let go of the sword, and the sword launched toward him. But Ren hit the ground instead, and he told Ren that it was alright. Then he touched Ren's hand while assuring him that it was alright, and that if he left, he could see his little sister. Ren cryingly told him that he treated him horribly, but he just told Ren to take a deep breath because he was fine already. Then Ren came back to his normal state and told him that he got it, and they should just leave for now, to which he replied that they should hurry up. But then Ren was worried and stunned when he saw something. He called his name and wondered if Ren was still tempted. But suddenly Ren stood up, held his sword tightly, and quickly walked in behind him. But then blood came out, and when he looked back to ask what happened, he saw Ren was slashed. He was stunned and shocked while Ren slowly fell, and Ren coughed blood because of his injury. He immediately dragged him while worriedly calling his name, but Ren just told him that he was glad that he was fine. But then he heard someone asking where they were trying to go, and Dai teasingly asked him if the farce was over already. Then he noticed the feather on Dai's shoulder, then he remembered Alina slowly dying in front of him. Then he looked at Ren with shining pupils and noticed that when he heard that Ren had something to protect, he thought it was just some idealistic words, and whether he would act upon it, or if it was just empty words. But he was the one who knows best that, even though Ren died to cover for him, and if he made it meaningless, then Ren would have died in vain. Dai teasingly told him that by looking at Ren like this, he was acting cute, but he just silently looked at Dai, who was teasingly asking him if he was like some brat trying to dual-wield swords. He apologized to him because it wasn't a game he plays. But he knows that he has one thing he has to make sure of, and it was the C-rank hunter, Dai, will die that day. Before it, Dai knows that raiding the dungeon was a failure. Their team collapsed, and the hunters were all wiped out. This made him wonder why something like this had to happen, but he was sure that it wasn't his mistake. He believed he was always right. Then he looked at the scavengers and decided that it was their fault. Dai grabs the feather on his shoulder and thinks that Ren was the one who hindered the hunter's movements. He believes the insect doesn't deserve to live. Then he starts to attack the scavengers, thinking that he'll make them fully pay for the failure, and that they should all go to hell. He continues to attack them, thinking that they are worthless, but then Dai notices someone from a distance and sees Shu sitting on the ground. He smiles while thinking that Shu needs to die too because he's like a cheeky, intrusive maggot. Then Dai runs toward him to kill him, and when he swings his sword to kill Shu, Ren blocks it to save him. But Dai just laughs hard at this and tells Ren that he thought Ren would be scared before dying. He glares at Dai, who teases him about even tiny insects as spirits, and asks what he's doing with a thing like that. He warns him not to think of fighting him, as there is a difference in status between them. Then Dai teases him, saying he's a hunter with abilities, unlike a brat who hasn't awakened yet. He threatens to start with his eyes, but then he vanishes, making Dai confused. Then he appears behind Dai, making him shocked, but Dai manages to grab the shield and block his attack in time. Dai swings his sword to force him back while furiously telling him that he's still talking. Then he attacks him, but luckily, he avoids it. He lands, noticing that he can move, and realizes that despite Dai's madness, he is a hunter with unusual power. He guesses that Dai's regular training will help him, but he knows the tough thing is that Reimara is enjoying the situation. So he focuses on the hunt and jumps toward Dai to attack him. But Dai blocks his attack using the shield again and attacks him back. He blocks it too with his sword, but Dai's attack hits his face a little. Still, he dodges Dai's next attack but is thrown away by the force. He glares at Dai and realizes that he's at a disadvantage. His mind tells him to dodge the attack, but his body can't keep up. He thinks that if he could use even a small percent of his previous world's power, he could keep up. Then Dai calls him names and angrily asks how he can move like that. He just smiles, thinking that Dai gets upset when things aren't one-sided. Then he teases him and slowly walks toward Dai, asking if he needs help to breathe. Dai jumps at him in anger and attacks, breaking the ground, but he jumps back to avoid it. Dai attacks again, but he avoids it, getting cut on his hand and leg. Dai attacks again in anger, but he jumps back and swings his sword at Dai, hitting him with speed. Dai is shocked to see that he's bleeding, and he knows that he's been hit. So he takes it further, cutting Dai's shoulder, breaking his armor, and slashing his stomach. Then he continues to attack Dai, who's fearful and worried. Then Dai jumps back while bleeding and angrily wonders what's happening, as he can't believe he's being pushed back by a scavenger. Dai shouted with anger that it can't be real. Then the system pops up, showing Dai that his strength, super enhancement, will of steel, and quick speed were turned on. Dai jumped at him, but he just stood still. He thought that since Dai was using all his power, Dai was so fast that he couldn't see him with his eyes. But it was easy for him to tell where the force was coming from. Then he closed his eyes, thinking that Dai was really silly to use his power that way. Then he jumped forward to meet Dai, who was laughing at him because Dai's path was easy to see. When Dai's sword was close to him, he just dodged it, grabbed his sword tightly, and swung it in the air while his eyes were closed. Dai couldn't believe his sword was broken into pieces. Then he opened his closed eyes and quickly cut Dai's foot. Dai fell to the ground, and he walked slowly towards him. Dai called him a name and asked with anger if he thought he could get away with it. But he just said that those feathers were making people confused, and asked Dai if he was going to say he was okay just before he died. But then he told Dai that he deserved to die. Dai said back that it was silly because it was all made up, and he was a hunter, so a loser like him who hasn't woken up yet can't do anything. But he just told him to die. Then he swung his sword and cut off Dai's head. Dai's head was thrown and rolled near his feet. He just looked at it and looked around, thinking that he hadn't seen that many dead bodies in a long time. He guessed it was because he had been alone for the last few hundred years of his old life. Suddenly, a blue light came out of his body, making him puzzled. He wondered if it was because he thought of his old life. Then he felt some sort of magic power. He wondered if feeling magic just by holding a sword was considered awakening. But then something like a system showed up in front of him, making him jump. The system slowly came up and told him that his level went up. Then the system kept showing up, making him wonder if he awakens. Then the system showed his status window. He was level 6 with muscle strength, physical strength, speed, staying power, and resistance of 10. But his magic was 0 and his extra points were 25. His state was good and his title was nothing. He wondered if the status window was okay. Then he looked at his power as a killer with the power of E-, which means getting heretics excited. Its power was taking the bad karma of heretics and turning it into power, but it didn't make sense to him. He looked down and remembered how Ren yelled his wish and thought it was strange because the people who really wanted it lost their chance, and guys like him awakens. But before he finished talking, he heard the boss make a loud noise and fly around him, dropping feathers on him. He just told it that it was too loud. Then the system showed up in front of him and he saw that his magic, which was 0, went up to 1. He knew that it was only 1 point more, but between magic 0 and 1, the difference was like heaven and earth. Then he told the boss not to think he was the same as before and told it to come to him. He always wonders why mana works like that in that world. He knows that they are just releasing it without an ounce of control, and though thrilled at the fact of being awakened, they do not give a second thought about what is to come. Hence, they became conceited. He knows that the basic usage of mana is as follows: strengthen the body with delicate control, then enlarge the flow, connecting the lines. He settled his feet on the ground to find the most efficient path, then he throws his sword powerfully toward the boss. His sword hit the boss's face and cut a piece of it. Then his sword was pierced into the wall, breaking it in the process. The boss shouted in pain when it felt the injury on its face, but he just smiled and told it to be quiet. Then he jumped toward it, jumped behind its back, aimed his sword at its wing while telling it that death always comes in an instant, and cut its wing off. It shouted in pain once again, and he goes behind its back again, then immediately look at it. He knows that he needs just once more because he has to concentrate more. Then he started to gather all the mana in his body while the boss was about to attack him too. Then he jumped toward it, knowing that he needs to make it explode. He jumped using the wall, breaking it in the process, and aimed at it from behind. Then he slashed it in half, so when he landed, it was falling on the ground. He stood up while his mana was wrapped around him and slowly looked back. Then he saw that it was dead on the ground. But then he slowly fell and remembers that the calamities brought forth by the queen were overloaded, and they have come to devour their world, Aslan. So the 8 races of the Aslan continent posed their representatives and worked together to face the unknown enemy. But though the enemy was incomprehensibly strong, the 8 races faced it with determination, fighting many fierce battles, and in the end, after overcoming numerous battles, they finally achieved victory. But then the queen asked him if it was the future he was dreaming of and that he was poor. He was shocked and told the queen that he was sure that he had defeated her. Then he immediately told Alina to run away, but Alina changed to the queen's face and teasingly asked him where should she run and reminded him that all the stars in the heavens have dispersed, and yet he still clings to hope. Then the queen firmly told him to remember that the consequence is all due to his incompetence. Then all the 8 and Alina changed to demon faces while the queen told him that the mark of his sins will continue to burn him even in his next life. Then he woke up in shock, caught his breath, and sat up straight away. Suddenly, someone told him that he was finally awake. He looked at his side and saw a man in a suit drinking tea. The man told him that he had been sleeping for 3 days and called him Scavenger Kiritani Shu, but he just asked the man who he was. The man told him not to be so wary of him and gave him his card while telling him that it was who he was, but he just asked the man what happened to everyone else. The man put his card on his bed while telling him that he was good even though he was a scavenger. The first thing he thinks of when he wakes up is his teammates. Then the man told him that the first attack team of the Brave Guild has been completely destroyed and everyone, including his captain, was beyond saving. When the medic team arrived, he was the only survivor. He asked the man, what about a person named Igawa Ren? The man replied that the funeral of the deceased had been conducted at the hunter's headquarters, all while he was in a coma. Then the man told him to let him move on to the main topic and said he was sure he must have realized, but a maze of Raymara has been promoted to B rank. He asked him if he had any thoughts about it and told him that a guild that has just been promoted to D rank would find it very hard. But Dai is really unlucky all the way. He replied that he didn't have any thoughts on it, but he asked the man what he meant by all the way. The man understands that he was not told because Dai probably wouldn't have said it to anyone. He told him that Dai has a big debt because of his bad gambling habits, and that was the reason why he took on the dungeon even knowing how hard it was. This made him curse Dai in anger. He squeezed his blanket in anger while the man told him that the sudden change in the dungeon seems to be true, and they are still looking into the strange change in the dungeon, so he should call them again if he can think of anything else. He lay back on his bed, upset, and figured out that Ren's death and Dai's silly reason to do the Reymara raid, as well as his awakening, were bad. Then he turned on the TV and heard the report saying that it was time for him to be a hunter. Then he introduced the guest, who was a famous person, so he told the viewers that he hoped everyone was excited. Then the lady walked toward him while he was telling the viewers that the top hunter of Japan and the second in command of the Bane Guild was named Aoki Sora. The reporter also told the viewers that Sora was given 4 abilities when she awakens, and it was very rare. He knew that Aoki Sora was more famous than most stars, and if she was seen as SS rank, he wondered what he was. Then he opened his ability list and the system showed the executioner again. He guessed that heretics meant bad people in general, and the basis of his thinking was that it started when Dai died. But he thinks the problem is what counts as a bad person. And it's not just a rare ability, but an ability only he has. He says that if there is a killer around, he would love to test it out. But then he put it aside because he knew that the most important thing is that his rank is E-. Then he remembered his dream and thought it was interesting. A bit later, in reception, the nurse told him that it would be all for the checkout, and that he should look after himself. Then he walked to the exit door while thinking that he thought everything was pointless, and the hunters who couldn't use their powers to the full, the mana and abilities that he, who couldn't do anything, have. He thought it was all pointless. Then he stood up, faced the dungeon, and slowly walked to go into it. When he was inside, he heard a loud growling sound and then saw bright big yellow eyes far away. But he got a chance to make up for the mistakes he had made, so he planned not to watch the same sad thing happen again in his life now. But he knew that the only thing he can do now is decide what his very first goal is, and it was that he will rise to the top. Meanwhile, in Shinsei Hospital, in the rehabilitation room, the nurse opens the curtain while telling someone that it was the end of her treatment, and the next person is waiting, so he should watch his step while exiting the room. Then the nurse looks at the shining crystals on the table and tells her that it was convenient that they got a material cube for her treatment. The lady excuses herself to ask the nurse if it's alright if she doesn't have a chaperone. The nurse looks at her and asks if her parents were not with her, to which she replies no. The nurse asks her to confirm if she was Igawa Eri and was about to tell her that in the recent incident her brother, but then another nurse appears and tells her co-nurse that she'll take over from there, so she should help out over there. The nurse replies that she understands and tells Eri that she was glad to be working with her. The other nurse catches her breath in relief while apologizing to Eri because the first nurse was quite straightforward and tells her not to worry about it. She replies okay and thanks the nurse, but the nurse sadly tells her that she might have heard of it already, but his brother. But Eri cuts the nurse's words by calling her name Mizuhara, and Mizuhara asks her what it was. She tells Mizuhara that she wants to eat something sweet. Her sickness was called mana allergy, and because the gates that started appearing 50 years ago spread mana within the atmosphere, a new disease appeared, and it gradually makes them lose their vitality, then eventually leading to death. It is specified as an incurable disease, and until then, no one has made a complete recovery yet, so currently, even at a hospital, they can only suppress the symptoms with a material cube. But still, it's convenient that they got a material cube for their treatment. She looks at her hand hopelessly, but then she hears the reporter telling everyone that their last week's broadcast was a huge sensation on the internet, and Japan's #1, the SS rank hunter, Aoki Sora, was with them again. Then Aoki releases a powerful lightning power on her hand, grabs it, and releases a more powerful weapon, making the reporter amazed and tells everyone that no matter how many times she sees it, it was still so shockingly powerful, and the ratings for that scene have shot up. She is stunned in amazement when she sees it, but suddenly, a kid shouts that it was amazing. The kid happily says that the lightning was all crackling and that if he even awakens, he definitely joining the Bane Guild. But she calmly thinks that the kid still has a few years to go before he can become a hunter. The kid asks her if she doesn't think Aoki was amazing and tells her that he heard Aoki had 4 abilities when she awakened. Then the kid also excitedly asks her what she thinks about Aoki and if Aoki isn't cool, but she just smiles at him and lovingly replies that Aoki is super cool. A moment later, the mother of the kid angrily asks her child why is he going off on his own again, and sweetly apologizes to her, but she just replies that it was nothing. Then she walks outside to get some Coca-Cola and thinks that even though Aoki is the same age as her, she is Japan's top hunter, and Aoki was completely different from her, who couldn't even adapt to that new world. Then she remembers that ever since her parents passed away from the Fisher's flood, her brother has been supporting her, but because her body is like it, she has always been a burden to her brother. The tears in her eyes pour onto the Coca-Cola she was holding, and she sadly tells her brother that she misses him. But then, someone cheers a can of Coke to her Coke and tells her that she'll stand out if she cries at a place like it. She looks up and sees Mizuhara happily smiling at her. Mizuhara tells her that she should smile when she's having a hard time because she was sure her brother also wishes the same and that she has to get well soon so she can be happy on her brother's behalf. Mizuhara also tells her that she was sure her brother thinks the same and has prepared a present for her somewhere. She smiles and thanks Mizuhara for comforting her, but then she hears Mizuhara confused about something and asks what it was. Mizuhara tells her to look at the moon and tells her that she wonders why even though it was broad daylight, the moon is so clear. Suddenly, they hear someone shouting to everyone to quickly run away, making them look back in panic. Then someone tells them to get to the shelter quickly because it was a fisher's flood. The man tells Mizuhara that they just received word from the Hunters Association, and they need to move before it expands. But Mizuhara looks at the moon while telling him that it doesn't look like there are any monsters. But then the ceiling slowly collapses, making Mizuhara look back and see a huge hand breaking the wall behind Eri. The hand is pulled back while they were stunned in fear, then a huge monster walks inside and looks at them. Mizuhara shouts to Eri to run away quickly. But Eri's legs are shaking in fear even though she knows that she needs to run away. The monster bends down to look at her, but then Mizuhara hugs her from behind and pulls her while telling her to brace herself because they need to make it to the lobby. Mizuhara also tells her that the association already has a grasp on the situation, so a hunter should be arriving soon. But Eri pushes Mizuhara away, thinking that she can't let Mizuhara do something like it and she can't bear having someone else sacrifice themselves for her again. Mizuhara worriedly calls her name and tries to grab her again. But the man stops Mizuhara and tells her that there is no saving her. Eri falls, and the monster tries to grab her while she is wondering if anything would change because of her action. When she is accepting her death while thinking that if she also had power she could help, Shu jumps toward her and attacks the monster. She slowly opens her eyes when she hears someone saying that like brother like sister and tells her to try thinking about the people she is leaving behind. She asks him who he was, but he just asks her back if she was Igawa Eri, and tells her that he was there to represent her brother. Then he introduces himself as her brother's benefactor. She cries, remembering her sweet and gentle big brother, and thinks that she found what her brother left for her. Meanwhile, in the rank dungeon, the desert of Dordolemia, Aoki was running and stopped when the monsters popped up in front of her. Then she calmly jumped toward them and hit a monster in the head using her weapon, making it slam on the ground hard. While another monster was flying toward her to attack, the monsters angrily growled at her. But she just prepares her weapon and stabbed it into the monster's mouth. Then she attacked the other monsters with full power, making them fall to the ground one by one, dead. Someone said that a lawyer contacted Sora earlier and, to be specific, his family member was a lawyer, and the person himself is a rank hunter. Kaido Riku, a member of the Bane Guild affiliated hunter, told the lady that it was daring to try to get close to that Aoki. Ibara Yumi, also a member of the Bane Guild, replied that the lawyer ended up having his phone snapped in two. Riku told Yumi that Aoki does have a lot of admirers, to which Yumi replied obviously because she was the only SS rank hunter in Japan. Aoki heard a loud growling, making her shocked, and saw a lot of monsters jumping toward her, but she just said that it was nice and that it was really nice. Then a loud explosion could be heard from a distance, making Riku tell Yumi that he guessed it was the reason why Aoki was so into her work today. But then Riku heard something growl loudly and said that the boss came out really fast today, making him wonder if that meant all the mobs had been taken care of. Then he aimed his gun at it, guessing that it was time for them to get to work. But when he was about to attack it, Aoki told him that she would do it. Aoki dodged its attack while Riku told her that he didn't really care either way and called her Aju to tell her to have fun. But Yumi reminded him to stop calling Aoki like that because she really hated it. Aoki released her lightning power and electrocuted the boss. After being electrocuted, it jumped back underground to escape. She landed on the ground, raised her weapon with her lightning power, told the boss that there was no point in running, then powerfully stabbed her weapon into the ground. Then the lighting on her weapon spread around her. Riku told Yumi that he really had to thank that rank hunter for it, and Yumi told him that she was really taking it all out on the boss for real. Then the system showed them that the dungeon had been cleared. Riku thanked Aoki for her hard work and asked her if she was going back now. Then Yumi told Riku that she thought Aoki heard every word without them realizing something was forming in the air. He asked Yumi if she was sure because he didn't say a word to Aoki. Then an eye opened in the air, which made the ground shake like there was an earthquake, making Aoki immediately look back. Yumi told them that they already defeated the boss, so she wondered why there was a fissure. But Riku just told her to look up, and they saw the dungeon core above them. Yumi asked Riku if the core wasn't supposed to appear somewhere deeper, and Riku replied that changes always appear without warning. Then he aimed at the core and released a powerful attack from his gun. His attack flew directly to the core, but his attack just stopped close to it and did not hit it. The system showed him that the effective shooting distance was 4.5 kilometers. The max shooting distance was 7 kilometers, but his distance toward his target was 12 kilometers, which meant it was too far for him. Aoki asked him what the distance to the target was, and he replied that it was about 12 kilometers, and a half-hearted attack would be too weak for it while it was gathering its power to the center. Riku also told her that regardless of the attack power, she normally couldn't reach a target that far off even though they were running out of time. She told them that they should change their location since the Fisher's Flood would be happening soon. Riku looked back and told her that he guessed she was right because the dimensional gate had been opened, so he guessed the Fisher's Flood had started, and they didn't have time to be hesitating. Imu and Riku jumped off the cliff while Aoki told them that she had already contacted the guild, so both of them should focus on the rescue operation. Riku asked her what she was planning to do, and she replied that obviously, she would bring down the moon. A reporter told everyone that there was a Fisher Flood occurring in Setage Ward, and the threat level was S rank. Then he asked the man if a Fisher Flood usually started in the dungeon, and the man replied that it was completely correct. The man explained that a Fisher's Flood is a rank higher than the dungeon it is based on, and judging from the scale of the flood, it must have originated from a dungeon that was at least a rank. Also, the moon they saw above the heart of the capital was the core of the Fisher Flood, and the guardians who were to protect the core had yet to be seen. He asked her to confirm if her illness was a mana allergy and how she was feeling. She replied that she was okay and asked him if he was the scavenger who worked with her brother, to which he replied yes. She asked him what her brother said about her and if her brother told her things like a burden and such because, in the end, it was her fault that her brother died. But he told her that Ren didn't die because of her, and if she found it hard to believe, she should take in her feelings of obligation and use it as her motivation because with it, one day she would be able to overcome it. However, she should remember that Ren was always thinking of her, so she should never forget it. She cried and shook in pain and sadness, hearing it, but he just pointed at the core and told her that they would continue after exterminating that thing. A moment later, in the street, the buildings were burning and the monsters were chasing the humans and killing them. He jumped toward the monster and slashed it into pieces, thinking that during those few days, he had reached a conclusion after defeating many monsters. There was no reason to increase any other stats other than mana because if he increased his STR and AGI, the changes came quickly, but they peaked at a low ceiling. Then he remembered the man asking him if he wanted to test how effective the STR stats were, and he thanked the man for his quick understanding. After he was arm wrestling with a hunter that had 11 stat points in STR, he understood the difference clearly, but then he noticed that he didn't have time, so he should hurry. Then he jumped toward the monster, stepped on its shoulder to get force, and jumped higher. When he was jumping, he put his 29 points in his mana, so his 1 mana increased to 30. He hit the building, but he continued to jump higher and felt a great feeling because of his high mana. When he thought he was in the right spot, he twisted his body in the air to get force and grabbed his sword tightly. Then he forcefully threw it toward the core. His sword flew toward the core direction, and he glared at it, hoping it would reach the core. His sword was close to hitting the core, and he was falling down quickly, but he continued to pray that his sword would reach the core. Unfortunately, his sword didn't reach the core, and he fell to the ground hard, breaking it in the process. But he figured that his attack wouldn't work because he knew that his level was not high enough, so he had to try something different. But then he saw a loud explosion in the close distance, making him wonder what it was. On the other hand, Aoki released her lightning power, and the system showed her that her lightning flash, thunder blast, and lightning rain abilities were activated. When she was done gathering all her abilities and her weapon, she attacked the core using them, and it fell toward it. Fortunately, she hit the core with her power, and she was glad that it was working. But he was confused when he saw that it was there, and she realized that there was another core, making her wonder if it means the moon is the guardian. Then the core gathered its power in the center and attacked her back with it. She swung up her weapon and tried to block its powerful attack using her 3 abilities, but she still got thrown away because of the force. Shu immediately ran toward her and grabbed her waist to stop her from being thrown while telling her that he had pretty high expectations for her since they said she was an SS rank. Then he firmly told her to focus because many lives depend on her, but she just asked him who he was and told him to get away from her. He was disappointed because Aoki wasted all her mana and instructed her to circulate her mana as he guided it. She felt that he changed her mana flow by force, but she knew that there was no time, so she should just push him away. But then she felt her mana stabilized, or rather, she felt it like it was overflowing. But she knew that she should have used everything she had, made her wonder how he did it. But then she realized that she shouldn't worry about it for now. Then she told him that he had quite a peculiar ability, and she now understood that they were on the same side. But he just told her that they should destroy that thing. She once again attacked it with all her mana and power while shouting to him that she knew it already. Her powerful attack once again hit the core that was in the distance, making a loud explosion in the air, and it slowly broke because of it. She exhaustingly caught her breath and told him that she did it. but he told her that she did not, and not yet, made her shocked and confused. When she looked, he saw the core broken, but still there while he was telling her that the core was still alive, and it was pretty tough. Then he asked her if she could give it one more shot, but she replied that it was impossible because she was at her limit already, so she can't. And as frustrating as it is, they have no choice but to wait for reinforcement. But he told her that he might be able to deal with it. Then he jumped to her weapon, making her ask him what he was doing. He told her that she was still Japan's best hunter for now, so surely she had the power to send a single person flying. She asked him if he meant himself when he said to send a person flying. But he just told her that he didn't have time to explain, so she should just do something like the attack she just used. She swung her weapon backward to get force while telling him that he was a weird guy, then threw him powerfully to the sky while telling him that she wouldn't care if it ended up badly. He directly flew toward the core, and when he was close to the core, he thought that he had enough force and that if he could just get close, he could do it. Then he added his 5 points to his mana, so his 30 mana increased to 35. Then once again he twisted his body in the air, knowing that he was at a shorter distance, and threw his sword toward it once again, but this time, he put his feet on his sword handle and kicked it hard toward it to add another force. His sword speedily flew toward it, and when it was close to the core, it fortunately hit the core in the center and pierced inside it, breaking it into pieces. Aoki couldn't believe the scene in front of her eyes, and she saw how the core exploded into pieces while he was falling down. Then the core disappeared, and he fell down in speed while the system continuously showed him that he had level ups and obtained a new ability. He said that it was perfect, looked at Aoki, twisted his body around when he was close to landing, and landed on the building's rooftop. Then straightly jumped away, leaving Aoki confused. She noticed that he not only corrected her flow of mana but even crushed the Guardian of the Flood, making her wonder if there could be other SS rank hunters than herself. The next day, in the hospital, the reporter reported to everyone that the Fisher Flood yesterday was of an extremely rare type ranked S+, and it was all thanks to Aoki that casualties were kept as low as they are. But Aoki told the reporter that there was another hunter who helped her, but he disappeared as soon as it was over, so she has no way of knowing who he is, but she would very much like to meet him again if she had the chance. Hearing it, Eri asked him if he was the hunter Aoki was talking about. But he just asked her how she was feeling because she looked like she was doing a lot better, and she replied that she was a bit worried when she got hospitalized. But she feels a lot better now. He wondered if Aoki really needed to bring it up. Then Eri asked him if he was no longer a scavenger, and he replied she was right because he awakened recently. Then she asked him if he was going to be a hunter, but he replied that honestly, he didn't know because there is an exam to become a hunter and everything. She told him that he should absolutely take it, but he explained that he meant his level is still pretty low, but she told her that she'll root for him because she was sure he'll make a wonderful hunter. He was stunned to hear it and softly replied that she was right because nothing beats having status, so he'll try taking the hunter exam. A moment later, in the hunter exam ground at F-rank dungeon Nadir Rainforest, the reporter greeted their viewers and reported that he was on the Go Hunter channel, a channel that brings them insights into the hunter's secrets. He also told the viewers that they would be streaming the 588th hunter's test straight from the examination grounds. Then he called a hunter and asked if he may speak to him for a moment. After the reporter asked the man a question, Yabuki-gu, a hunter examinee with 3 abilities from awakening, replied that Aoki has 4 abilities when she awakened, and he awakened with 3 himself. The reporter told Gu that he seemed really confident and asked him what rank he was aiming for that time around. Gao replied that obviously, he was aiming for first place and asked the reporter if there was any reason to aim for any place lower than that. Behind Gao, Shu thinks Gao is probably a rank at best, and Gao is just wasting his mana by letting it leak out. But he was surprised when the reporter shouted that Aoki arrived there. Then he saw her with a beard-suited man while the reporter told the viewers that their test at that time would be overseen by their guest, Aoki. She greeted them good afternoon, introduced herself politely, and told everyone that she hoped everyone is able to showcase their abilities to their fullest. The examinees were shocked to hear her voice and excitedly ran toward her while asking if she was for real, and if it wasn't the first time Aoki has come to the examination site. But he just calmly looked at them and guessed that normally there isn't a guest. But he knows that it seems troublesome to get involved, so he wants to escape as soon as possible, but the best thing to do is refrain from engaging in anything eye-catching. The examinees told her that she was the best and that they'll enter the Bane Guild after they pass, so she should wait for them, making her sigh in frustration and remember asking the man why he wanted her to be a guest at the examination site. The man replied that the fissure flood she destroyed the other day originated from the dungeon desert of Dortolemia. The man's name is Uhara Junasuk, the owner of the Bane Guild and guild master. Junasuk explained to her that because it was their guild who was tackling the dungeon while that happened, the public is making a scene saying that they were putting on a show for her, making her say that it was ridiculous. Junasuk told her that he agrees with her, but it isn't something they can ignore, and apparently, in the next examination, the Japanese president of the association will be attending as well, and it was the reason why if she was to attend, they would be able to appease both the masses and the people in charge. Then the rumors should also die down right after and remind her that if she finds any promising rookies, she should scout them for their guild. The host apologized to the examiners for the long wait and told them that the 588th Hunter examination will now commence. Then the examiners immediately ran inside. The drones with cameras followed them while the reporters reported everything, and the examiners were rushing inside the examination room. On the other hand, Shu jumped onto the branch of the tree knowing that the mission is to stay alive for 24 hours, and noticed that the rest of the examiners seemed to be moving along with the program. It was easy for him to understand it, but it was really boring. But then he felt powerful mana behind him, so he immediately turned around to check it, knowing that it was mana enchantment and it was weak, but it was obvious that they are someone from his past, so he wondered who it was and if it means that there were more reincarnates like him. On the other hand, on the stage, Wakamatsu Kenzu, the Hunters Association president, wondered who would be the top candidate at that time, and she replied that maybe it'll be Yabuki-gu because he had 3 abilities at the time of his awakening. Then she asked him if he has a different opinion, and he replied that the young ones seemed to have forgotten that the person who stopped the first fissure flood in Japan, the Flame of Hell, was a hunter below S rank. She can't say anything if the person who was at the scene says it, so she just asked him who he, the president, thinks will come out on top, and he replied that number 241 seems to have potential because he hasn't wasted a minute. She checked the examiner's number 241 and was shocked to see Shu. Kenzu told her that examiner 241 was named Kiritani Shu, 20 years old, and even though he was young, he was really calm and he was like when he was active in the field. But she just silently released her mana and creepily smiled while realizing that Shu was someone who just awakened. On the other hand, he jumps to another branch of the tree and looks down. Then he sees Gu telling the man that he has always been a loudmouth since high school, and just by looking at him, he can tell how much his grandfather amounts to. The man releases his mana while reminding Gu that he was pretty sure he had said it to him as well and that it was not right to talk bad about his grandfather. The man's name is Kishida Shin, a hunter examinee, but Gu and his friend just teasingly ask Shin if a loser like him with only a single ability wants to try him. Then Shu jumps into the center of the men. Gu angrily asks him what his problem is and tells him that he doesn't know who he is supposed to be, but if he doesn't want to get caught up in it, he suggests he get lost. He looks at Shin while telling Gu that he'll just do as he suggests because he has been meeting a lot of problematic people recently, and he really hates troublesome things. Then he grabs Shin and speedily runs away while telling Gu that he'll take that guy as well. Gu's friend chases after them while shouting that they should not let them get away, but when one of them is close to him, he kicks him back, making the man stumble to the other and both fall hard on the ground. Shin asks him who he is, but he just tells Shin the words Aslan, Edia, and Overload. Then he asks Shin if he understands any of those terms, but Shin replies that he doesn't understand anything. He tells Shin that it is best for him to speak honestly because the mana enchantment he was using was racial, and he knows about it, then asks him who taught him to use it. Shin is shocked to hear it and asks him how did he know his ability, but he just tells Shin that he seems to know something. Then he forcibly stops himself from running and they settle behind a rock. A minute later, he asks him to confirm if he means he has awakened to the ability his grandfather taught him. Shin replies yes and asks him if there is a problem. He replies that there is a problem and it is a big one. He can't believe that the racial would become an ability and thinks that it might be a key to his connection with his past life. Then he tells Shin that he would be a good gopher, but Shin tells him that he doesn't really want to be a gopher or a pawn. He asks Shin what his name is and Shin replies that he is Kishida Shin. He is 19 years old and a first-year university student. Then he introduces himself next, making Shin realize that he is his senior and tells him to take care of him. He once again asks Shin to confirm if the person who taught him about racial is his grandfather and Shin replies yes. He thinks for a moment and asks him if his grandfather has different names like Ruben or Robert. Shin is shockingly asked what he is saying and tells him that his grandfather is pure Japanese. Because of this, he guesses Shin isn't connected to his past life and things can't go that easily. Then he reminds Shin that he was involved with some guys earlier. Shin explains that the guy in the center was named Yabuki-gu and he was his classmate from high school. But after awakening, Gu always harassed people around him and he has always butted heads with him. However, he can't match up to him in terms of ability so he is not even taken seriously. He asks Shin if the number of abilities is that important, and Shin replies that the more abilities he has, the higher his rank. But then he swings his sword and cuts the huge stone in half behind them easily. Then he explains to Shin that he used 1 mana for it and he did not use his ability at all. Shin can't believe that he can do it without an ability. Then Shin begs him to teach him because he can't forgive a rotten human like Gu. He agrees but tells Shin that he has a condition and orders Shin to sit. A moment later, Gu tells Shin that he didn't expect him to come back on his own and he sees that he wants to die before the end of the examination. Shu tells Shin to go on and that it is his fight, so he will not intervene. Shin walks closer to Gu while telling Shu not to worry. But then Gu is shocked because he can feel that Shin is different from before, but he thinks Shin is just a loser with just 1 ability, so he can win against him even with his eyes closed. Shu sees that it is obvious how it is going to end and thinks that it is just a waste of time. Shin told Gu that he hasn't changed since high school and that he was still a punk. Gu furiously activated his power while shouting at him to stop butting in because he can use his powers however he wants. Shin launched toward Gu with his spear while telling Gu that at the very least, he should not cause trouble to people who aren't involved. His spear hit Gu's shield, and Gu called him an idiot and asked him if he really thought he would just shut up and let him attack him. The shield slowly bending while Gu teasingly explained to him that if the mana wall is hit with a physical impact, its mana explosion ability will activate. He felt pain because the heat was too strong. It felt like his hand was about to melt. But then he remembered Shu telling him that he has a habit of keeping his distance, so he should try to avoid that the next day, especially since they'll be using racial properly in spars, starting from the next day. Then he noticed that it was coming just like Shu said, and he only had 1 shot. Then he remembered Shu telling him not to just use the mana, but cover the spear with it and concentrate it all on a single point. The system showed him that his ability had leveled up, so his racial C increased to racial B. Then he forcefully stabbed his spear into the middle of the heat while shouting to Gu to take it. Gu tried to hold his shield together, but Shin's spear pierced it and broke it into pieces. Gu was stunned and shocked to see it, but Shin hit him with the spear stick before he could act again, making him be thrown hard to the ground. But Gu managed to stand up and thought that it was impossible, then wondered how it happened. Suddenly, Shin appeared behind him and hit him hard on the back, making him collapse on the ground. Shin looked at the passed out Gu and was amazed that he beat him. He couldn't believe that he defeated Gu before he could even use an ability and excitedly told Shu that he did it, and it was all thanks to him. Shu, who was done defeating Gu's friend and waiting for him on the side, replied that it was good for him. Shin bent down and asked him what they should do about the material cubes that the guy had, and he replied that of course, they will split it equally, so they should have 50-50 each. After splitting it, he proceeded to stand up and walk, but Shin asked him how that was equal when he obviously only got around 20%. But he reminded Shin that he said it before their practices, but he'll be taking half of his net income for lesson fees. Shin asked him if he was serious back then, but he just asked Shin if he forgot that he said that if he thinks about the contents of his teachings, it's not actually that bad of a deal at all. Then he told Shin that the exam should be about to end soon and asked him what he thought about hunting to kill some time. Shin replied that if it was possible for him, he would have long done it, and the only person who could probably do it in the remaining 12 minutes is him. But he told Shin that it doesn't matter and asked him if it was his right number. Then he reminded Shin that if he contacted him, he better come flying and also keep that deal a secret. To which Shin replied that he got it. Then he told Shin that he'll take his leave, but Shin told him to hold on because there were still some procedures left to go through. But he told Shin that it was something the people managing could take care of, and Shin thanked him very much for saving him. But Shu, who was the top of the 588th Hunter exam, just swung his hand goodbye to Shin while walking to go out of the examination room. When he was out of the room, he knew that there might be other people out there like Shin. He thought that to gather more people, he needed to create a new guild. But he knew that he needed to be a C rank to create a guild, so he needed to increase his rank as soon as possible. Then he met a lady with sunglasses and a mask. They silently faced each other, but he immediately turned around to leave, telling her that she had the wrong person. But she stopped him and told him that she didn't even say anything yet. He asked her if she had business with him again, and she replied yes, and it was the personal kind. Then she explained that she didn't think he would pass without going through the formalities and disappear just like that. Furthermore, he left using the emergency portal in the middle of the city. Then Aoki told him that they should talk for a bit. A moment later, in Hunter Mall, Aoki told him that the combat coat looked nice, it suited him, and she thought it matched someone like him who specializes in speed during combat. And those stamina recovery items too, like leggings, a belt, and an item pocket. Aoki was busy pointing at everything while he expected it for an SS rank because every single one of them was top grade items. But he still told her that he didn't know what she was trying to do, but she should not think his feelings would change if she do that. She told him that he didn't need to worry about it because career-wise, as a hunter, she was above him. It was not unusual if something suddenly happened in a dungeon because, as they say, chance favors the prepared mind. Furthermore, that money was a reward for helping with the flood fissure suppression, so he didn't have to think of it as a favor. He replied that he understood that there was no need for him to hold back. Then he saw the material corner station and asked if they were also selling materials. She replied yes, but explained to him that materials needed to be handled by experts. A minute later, he was holding 2 huge bags full of things and thought that it should be enough to make something similar to the soul pill while Aoki was looking at the long receipt and shaking. They entered the elevator, and he told her that she had been quiet for a while now. But she just told him that it was just his imagination. But the truth was she was thinking about the cost of the materials. She told him that she would get to the main point now, and it was her formal proposal. Then she begged him to join the Bane Guild and promised him that he would be given the same treatment as her. But he replied that he refused. She told him that he didn't have to turn it down so bluntly and asked him to at least tell her the reason. He told her that he didn't really have a reason, and he just didn't like being under someone else. She let go of the bags he was carrying while telling him that she understood, so she would amend her request and beg him to hold hands with her because she wanted to feel the sensation from back then again. He asked her why she was going that far and if she wasn't already Japan's top hunter. She replied that she wanted to aim for even higher heights, and the more people expected from her, the more results she needed to show. That is why she needed to be much stronger. He replied that he got it and that he accepted it. A moment later, in the gym, he told her that he was also curious as to what Japan's #1 would become, but she just told him that it was her personal gym, which was the largest and quietest place there. Then she asked him if it should be plenty, but he just noticed that she changed her weapon. She explained that the other was destroyed the day they brought down the moon. Then she told him that she would try her best to hold back from using her mana, but he told her not to and that she should use it however she liked. She told him that she thought he would say it and that he should get ready. Then she jumped toward him and attacked him using her weapon, but he just swung his sword backward and swung it toward her to block her attack. She was pushed a little, but she managed to compose herself, and he held his sword tightly and waited for her attack again while noticing that since Aoki isn't that great at controlling mana, she was separating it and making it into a battle of brute force, and he thought it was interesting. Aoki faced him, then jumped toward him again, but he simply avoided her attack. Then her weapon spun around, and she swung it down to attack him. But he jumped in time to avoid it. He landed on the ground where her lightning was weak, glared at her, and jumped to attack back. But when his sword hit her armor, mana came out of her body, making her shocked, and he realized that it was a density where the tip of his sword couldn't penetrate. She swung her weapon to make him jump back while telling him that she couldn't believe it and asked him if he was really an F rank. He was thrown in the distance while replying that on paper, he was F rank while he was getting a clear picture of it. He let go of his sword, knowing that it wouldn't be ending anytime soon. She noticed it and asked him if he was surrendering, but he replied that he was not and he was just using a sword, so he couldn't hold back, so he told her not to think too badly of him. His current mana of 35 was increased to 70 while he was telling Aoki that it just meant he had acknowledged her. Then he jumped toward her, but before he could get closer, she rolled her weapon around and released powerful lightning, making him guess that she wouldn't let him close the distance that easily, and he wondered if there was a way. Then he grabbed her lightning, knowing that it was it. She couldn't believe that he just grabbed the lightning with his bare hands. Then he jumped in the air while holding the lightning, which made her ask him what is that nonsense, but then he disappeared in the air and appeared behind her. He thought that the technique Aoki taught him in her previous life, and he couldn't believe he was going to have to use it there. When his hand was behind her, he used his permeating palm skill to attack her. Then she remembers people asking her if she received 4 abilities when she awakened, and if she wasn't she going to be representing Japan in the future. The others also told her that she wasn't just talented, but she also had such grace and maturity. Also, apparently, she contributed a lot during the Fisher Flood that time as well, so they should increase her rank to S. Then told her that they were looking forward to her future exploits. She thanked them and told them that it was much expected as it was her duty. After the meeting, she went outside, and a man told her that it had been 3 days since she had been taking a mission, and suggested that she take an off day and rest at home. She replied that he was right and that she should stay at home today, but then she heard someone asking someone what they were doing. She looked back and saw normal teenagers happily teasing each other around and smiling like they were enjoying their life. She was shocked to see them and imagined herself with them being carefree. The man asked her if there was something wrong, but she just replied that there was nothing wrong and ordered the man to bring her to the Fisher's Flood. She asked Shu if she lost, and he replied yes. She told him that she did expect it, but it surpassed her expectation, so she felt ashamed. But he told her that since she shoulders everything by herself, it was expected. But she told him that no one asked for a lecture, and she guessed it's a lot of pressure putting the country on her back. He told her that it was obvious and she wasn't the one who decided to shoulder all of it. She cried hearing it, but he still told her that she didn't have to rush things because no matter how much she pressured herself, things would only turn out to be the same, but she shouldn't misunderstand him because he was still supportive of her activities. She lifted her head up and told him that in that case, he should teach her the secret of his strength. He gave his hand to her while agreeing to her, but told her that he would do it only if she was coming to his side. A moment later, in the Saitama Prefecture E-rank dungeon, Shin was busy fighting with a monster. It jumped in the air and launched toward him to attack, but he just simply pierced his spear into its chest and slammed it hard to the ground. Then he excitedly told Shu that he had cleared that area. However, he thought he had seen that place somewhere before. Shu, who was looking at his phone, told Shin that he probably was imagining it. Shin told him that the target shield he received from him fit really well with him, and he told Shin that it was great, so from now on, he would be the sub-tank. Shin asked him if that wasn't a little sudden, but he replied that he was giving him the role based on his abilities, so he should not complain. Shin excitedly replied alright, and since he was the tank, he would go first. He was glad that Shin had actual talent and he had settled the incident with Aoki as well, so he knew that it was time for him to focus on becoming a C rank quickly to create a guild, because from there, he could try to gather information about his past life. But then he heard Shin shouting loudly, making him shocked, and immediately turned towards Shin while asking what was wrong. Shin shakily pointed at something, and they saw a person's corpse leaning on the stone. They lit up the torch on the wall, and he noticed that it was a tank and it hadn't been that long since he died. Shin asked him how could he tell, and he knew that even though it's minuscule, he could still feel the mana. Then he jumped in the other direction while telling Shin that it was that way, which Shin followed. Then they saw a lot of corpses laying on the ground, but he expected it. Shin asked him if the monster was stronger than expected, and he replied that he doubted it's the work of a monster. Then he told Shin to look at the order and how they had fallen, and the orders were tank, attacker, and healer. He thought they killed the most troublesome first, the healer, before moving on to the attacker and tank, and he knew that it was not something they would expect out of an E-rank dungeon monster, so he figured out that it was the work of another hunter. Shin couldn't believe it but figured out that the boss room in front would be. Then a moment later, they arrived at the boss's room and saw that the place looked really lived in. Shin told him that it looked like a hideout, and he told Shin that they even committed murder, so he thought they were probably really wicked people. He wondered if they ran away after getting their hideout exposed because he felt the mana left behind was still very prominent. Shin said that he couldn't believe they were in the dungeon they were grinding in, and he couldn't believe his bad luck. He asked Shin what bad luck was he speaking of because he thought that there was barely anyone as lucky as them. Then he opened his ability and thought that it was finally time to test out his executor's ability. Well guys, that's the end of the video. If you like this video, comment part 2 in the comments section. Also subscribe to the channel, hit the bell and like the video. Thank you for watching and see you next time again.